Hey, it's James Mulvaney here, founder of Radio.co. Today we're here at the Royal College of Physicians in central London, and I'm about to give a little talk, which is really exciting.
Hello, I'm John Revel here at the Radio Academy event in London. Just about to go on stage with James Mulvaney from Radio.co to have a good old chat about radio and how you can make your own radio station online.
But before we get stuck into the talk, if you're new to this channel, my name's James Mulvaney. I'm founder of Radio.co, Podcast.co, Matchmaker.fm and Q Podcasts. I'm always creating content like this, talking about radio, talking about how to grow your audience and all sorts of exciting things. So remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. So let's head downstairs, because I'm on in 10 minutes, and get set up for the talk.
So over and above, being in radio, I'm very commercially driven, very commercially minded. So, the whole Ginger buying of Virgin Radio and building the Ginger brand. And so I drove all of that. I created a London Blues Festival, which I sold to Live Nation. So I'm kind of very focused on the commercial aspect of radio. And that's why I contacted James, because I find it fascinating. And I think if you have some ideas for radio stations, to create your own radio station, the most important thing I think now is, how do you cut through? How do you break through? Because you've got the big players, we know it's dominated by 2 or 3 big players that have massive budgets. They can hire all the talent, and it is about the talent. Especially if you're a music radio station, it is about the talent. So how do you cut through? How do you break through all that noise to get your little radio station heard? And if I had the answer to that, I'd be a very rich man.
I wondered what your view, a bit of a double-edged question. I wondered what your view is on the sort of license structure, and do you have any thoughts about how that might sort of be reshaped a little bit in the forthcoming media bill?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Licensing is one of these things that it's one of the first questions we get asked constantly when people are thinking about starting a radio station. And it's not always, the answer's in the UK, it's relatively straightforward. You can go and get, especially if you're online only, you can get a small webcaster license, I think they're called, from PPL, and PRS have a very similar thing. Not particularly expensive, it costs you a few £100 a year, and again you can sign up and you can get access to those licenses very straightforward. It's a case of just go on the website, you register, you tell them your website address, what sort of content you're going to be broadcasting, etc., and you pay with your credit card or whatever. So it's quite straightforward. I think the struggles are when if you want to take things to the next level, and perhaps you want to take it, so you've got a terrestrial broadcast, whether that be on DAB or FM, makes licensing a bit more complicated. And also, we find for people who are just coming into the industry, and they've perhaps got an idea. So, for example, with some of the brand examples I gave at the end, they're not necessarily radio stations. They might have some involvement in music, but they don't understand licensing. So it's quite often, a kind of a learning curve in that case. And I think we've definitely, we've had conversations with PRS and PPL in the past. I think our view is it would be good to get a package together where we could kind of bundle that in as part of our services.
I've got a question about, I had an idea of a radio station called The Mentals. I actually have ADHD, so it'd be a bloody nightmare for me to organise. But I music, all kinds of things. Sorry, this is completely inappropriate, I apologise, but I think the idea is a good one, because mental health, whenever you talk about it with anyone, there's always stuff going on.
Absolutely.
Whether you have the mentals 24 hours a day, whether we tolerate that, I don't know. But is that something that could fly, do you think, if that's the right expression?
I think so. I think, the good thing about running your online radio station is that you can be super specific on who you target and how you market it. And again, I think one of the things I've observed, we've got about 5,000 stations currently running on our platform, and the difference between stations that do well and pull in an audience, and it doesn't matter if they're niche, it doesn't matter if they're just targeting a really specific demographic, is the ones that do well are the ones that have got a good marketing strategy in place. So they're thinking about social media, they're thinking about what content they're going to be writing and posting on the website. And if you're backing it up with a good content strategy and stuff that's kind of going on, with your online marketing, not just what's being broadcast on air. And again, that could just be taking stuff that's been broadcast and packaging it up in a different way. It might be that you're doing an interview with someone, you're having that transcribed and you're posting it as a blog post. But that will greatly increase your discoverability, and your web presence effectively.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask about figures? Like, what's success in that world?
That's a good question.
I don't know.
It depends, doesn't it? It depends on for example, without giving any away, we've got some clients who will get hundreds of listeners a week. We've got some which will get tens of thousands a week. We've got some that get millions a week. It just depends on the scale of the audience at hand, how well they're doing at reaching that audience. And the examples at the end, a lot of those brands, so for example, AC Milan, Cafe Mambo, they've already got audiences. They've got an actively engaged crowd of people who are following their brands. So if they launch a radio station, they've got, effectively a platform to promote it on, whether that be on their, marketing email lists or reaching out on social media. And again, it's just about reminding that audience to constantly tune in. It's all very well just launching a radio station, but you've got to have a follow-up strategy. We've got lots of hands going up now, which is good. Yes?
You're talking about being interested in the commercial. Where's the money?
Go on, John.
No, yeah. I don't know, if I'm honest. I think it's tough because if you get some traction behind your station and you start to drive listenership, then and you're going to sell some airtime, then how do you sell that airtime yourself? All the big guys, they have sales teams and departments to do that. Or, you can farm it out, but you've got to get to a point, haven't you, where you've got a substantial enough audience to drive that revenue. So either you're creating programming that is sufficiently different enough that's going to stand out from everything else, which is pretty tough, really, considering what's out there at the moment. So you have to either be so focused and niche on what your programming is and what your content and your output is that you're going to attract an audience. But is that audience going to be sufficiently big enough to drive revenue? And I think that's the conundrum that we kind of talk about quite a lot.
Yeah, and again, I think traditional monetization models of playing 30-second spot ads isn't necessarily the way forward for everyone. We've got lots of clients who have seen success raising money in other ways. So it might be that they've got paywalled content. They're using, again, this is quite common in podcasting now. Lots of podcasters have got some really substantial followings who will quite happily pay for access without advertising or access first or whatever it might be, or extended content. Again, tied in with different business models, whether they're sort of selling some kind of content, selling memberships, it could be even selling things like merchandise. It varies on the project and kind of, I guess, what you're trying to achieve. But I think running adverts is one thing, but listeners don't always want that. And again, I think some like Soho Radio, for example. I'm not sure if they currently got the sponsorship, but they used to have a partnership with Jägermeister. So Jägermeister were like the headline sponsor. So it'd be a case of they had one headline sponsor that would fund the radio station to a significant level. And because obviously with these stations, operating costs are much lower than traditional radio, that can be an effective solution.
I'm Paul Miller, Managing Director of Radio X in Exeter, but also we run the small-scale DAB service for Exeter, which we're able to launch shortly. So we have a number of organisations wanting to come on and take space on that network, but it has largely fallen away. So I just wanted to build on the licensing issue, which is one of the big costs, seems to be PR licenses. And I have the good fortune of sitting next to my new best friend here I've never met before, it's from PPL. So there are no special rates for small-scale DAB for PRS and PPL, but we're going to solve this morning, so that stations can come on with small-scale DAB services affordably. That will only cost you a couple of £100 a month, probably then, to get to a relatively small geographic area. So in the case of Exeter, the TSA in the old-fashioned jargon is about 130 to 140,000 people. if you can build a sizable audience from that,
Yeah.
all you need to do is be able to sell a couple of packages, the sponsorship packages, for a few £100 a month, and you have covered your costs on a radio station, and provided you're compliant to your Ofcom licence obligations, you can make a success of it, we believe, but we need Openreach to come dig a road up before we can go on it.
Yeah.
I think that, the Patreon model is interesting. There's a station that I listen to a lot online. It's called Radio Paradise, which is in Paradise in Colorado, and they've been around for a long time. Musically, it's a very, very good station. They've got 3 or 4 different surfaces, but it's free to air. But they don't shove it down your throat, but they're constantly asking for donations to keep it propped up. It's just a husband and wife duo, and of course the brilliant thing about the technology now is that you can do it for nothing. It absolutely costs nothing to do this, and I think the whole coronavirus thing was really interesting, wasn't it? I'm going to digress slightly here, only because I just want to prove a point on how tech has changed everything. About 5 years ago, I went to Scott Taunton, who News Corp, about Virgin Radio, and I said to him, I can get Jonathan Ross to come and do your breakfast show for you. Worked with Jonathan for many years. So he was really interested in that. I said, but the only thing is, he wants to do it from home. He doesn't want to get up, he's a lazy sod, he doesn't want to get up, he wants to shuffle down in his slippers and dressing gown and do the show. So if you agree to that, I'll get Jonathan to do it. And he said, oh no, we can't do that, that's impossible, you can't do that, you can't do radio from home. And guess what, you can, and because it was proven, wasn't it, during lockdown, and even the most complicated shows like Today Programme and 5 Live, all of that being done remotely. So the point being is the technology enables you to do that. Going back to the revenue streams, I think the only thing where you can really drive revenue on these smaller stations is to create sufficient content that is so compelling that people will pay for that. And another example of that is Danny Baker. So I guess most of you know who Danny Baker is. And so Danny has his it's more like a podcast, but it's kind of revolves around his radio format that he did at 5 Live. And now he's had to flip that to a Patreon site so he can drive some money from it, and I think he's getting about, I would say he's probably making about 8 or 9 grand a month on that. So for Danny, that's because that's just for him and Louise Pepper that is on there, but that's Danny Baker, and he had a hardcore following from 5 Live that he could drag across to that podcast, who then love it sufficiently that they'll happily pay a £5 a month. And I think that's the conundrum, isn't it, that you're going to have with a smaller station. How can you create amazing content that is going to differ so greatly from what's out there, and then build a sufficient audience, and then flip it over to a Patreon site that people are happy to pay for that? I think that is the conundrum.
There's a lead time there, isn't there? It's like you can't build an audience overnight if you're starting from nothing.
No.
But we've seen plenty of people do it, and again, I think it's about understanding who your audience is and making sure that your messaging, as I say, it needs to lead back into a good, comprehensive marketing strategy. There's no point of just building it and hoping they will come, because it doesn't always work like that. It works like that for a few people in some rare circumstances, but being strategic about who you're going to focus on targeting, how you're going to get to them, and what content you can create, not just on air, but actually on your website, on your social media strategies, to make sure that you're reaching that audience. And again, think about if you've got something really specific you want to do, who can you interview, who can you bring in and get on air or put on your website, who will be interesting to that audience, and they will also bring an audience with them as well. Yes?
Sort of picking up on the point you made about sort of having really distinctive content, what do you think is sort of the unique thing for audiences that local radio, hyperlocal radio can deliver? What is it that, what are the spaces that you're like, actually we can do this better than national radio can, than Spotify can, in an increasingly busy audio market? Where are the sort of unique sources or interesting, distinctive sources of value for audiences?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it kind of links back to what I was saying at the beginning. When I remember when I was growing up and I had access to local radio, I was really engaged with it because they were talking about what was happening and stuff that me and my friends could relate to. And I think if you're building something that's talking to the local community, you immediately have an advantage nowadays, I suppose, over what was the local radio landscape in the UK, which doesn't really exist anymore. And you can be specific, and you can talk about what's happening in a local area. You can get local businesses involved. You can be great brand advocates, effectively. You know, in the sense that, you know, going back to sort of the 90s, it sounds sort of old-fashioned now, but you know, it was real. I remember it being really exciting at the time. All the local stations were giving out car stickers. It was the same in any town you went to. You'd see cars with the car sticker on. You know, no one's going around driving a car with heart or something like that on the back now, are they?
There's a new documentary out called Kick Out the Jams, which is the history on XFM when it started. You know, because obviously it was a pirate, and you know the pirates don't exist anymore, do they? And in a way, I think it's very sad, because it was, you know, the reason people were listening to the pirates was because they were getting something they weren't getting from, you know, real radio. Well, you know, commercial radio or the BBC, and that's gone, isn't it? I watched the documentary. It's worth watching, and I thought, you know, they were doing something. They were offering. Going back to my point, you know, how do you create content that is so compelling that people want to get it? So, what XFM were doing then, and many of the other pirate schools, were creating or broadcasting stuff that you couldn't get anywhere else.
What was that called?
What the documentary is called, Kick Out the Jams.
Kick Out the Jams.
So, and Sammy Jacobs, that started XFM, you know, he was a pirate, and you know, and they eventually won you know, they won the London license, which we were bidding. I was heading up a bid for Ginger at that point. Michael Caine was the chairman, which was quite funny. I used to go to Michael Caine's house and smoke cigars with him. But that's a whole other story. And he used to, he lived in Chelsea, that big block, and he could see Wimbledon through his binoculars. And when it used to rain, he used to go, Shakira, phone Wimbledon and tell them that it's going to rain in about half an hour. Anyway. But they won it, quite rightly so, and I think the exciting thing about that was that it's worth watching, because you think, yes, that was pirate radio, and that was the exciting thing. They were doing something from a programming perspective that their listeners couldn't get elsewhere, and I thought that's enlightening. And that, sadly, to a degree, is gone, because, you know, anybody in here can come on, you know, radio.co and start your own radio station, which in itself is exciting, but it comes back to that: what are you going to create from a programming perspective that's going to be so brilliant that people have got to go and they want to go and listen to it?
I think this is all we've got time for. I just want to leave you with a quick video of just showing you a couple of examples of, as I say, a couple of the examples I gave. I think it's a few minutes long, and we're upstairs, by the way, so if anyone's got any questions for us, please feel free to come and find me later, and thanks everyone for coming.
Hey Alexa, launch Shady Pines Radio.
Playing Shady Pines Radio.
I am Callie. I am co-founder of Shady Pines Radio. So we chose to start a radio station when the lockdown happened, because we couldn't host events anymore, we couldn't record bands in our studio anymore, and we couldn't film videos as well. And so we started Shady Pines Radio in April of 2020, and with that being started, we had only 5 shows for like the first month on Shady Pines Radio. And then I reached out to friends and on Reddit, and we got a whole load of DJs now. We got over 90 DJs right now, and it's still growing, you know, so.
Radio is something I've always really appreciated. I really like the audio-only medium because it's simple, it only occupies one of my senses, and I can go about my day and listen. And radio in particular is very cool because unlike something like Spotify or like, you know, standard internet listening services, they're not based off of an algorithm. It's not music that's catered to you by a robot. This is actual humans catering music that they love, and it's only on when it's on. You gotta just tune in, and whatever you get is what you get. Radio.co is pretty sweet. It makes creating a radio station obtainable for anybody who's willing to put in a little bit of time. It's really pretty accessible and pretty intuitive. Yeah, it's powerful tools that are easy to use.
Gen X Radio, Suffolk, where music is just better. Gen X Radio, Suffolk, across the county.
About June of last year, I found myself on air. So why don't we build a radio station, I said. How hard could it be? People say, well, radio, is it a thing anymore? Yes, it's a thing. Do people listen anymore to the radio? Yes, they do. But online internet radio, that doesn't really count, does it? Yes, it does. But how do you explain that our listening figures are a lot higher when we have live presenters on than when we are automated? It's the same music. How do you explain that? Because radio is still a thing. It is still valued. People do want a friend. They do want company. And if you do it right, you can get an audience. You can maybe sell a few adverts, make a couple of quid, and become an actual proper functioning radio station.
Gen X Radio Suffolk, playing you Culture Club and Time Clock of the Heart. Good morning to you, Tim Goff at Breakfast with Francesco's in St Matthew Street, Ipswich. You bring the hair, we have the style. And welcome to my remote studio, which I've decided to house in my summer house. This is the garden studio just north of Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk, where I sit every morning and broadcast not only to the county but worldwide as well. And for somebody that's worked in commercial radio for 25 years, it's kind of mind-blowing how little equipment you need these days to actually reach your audience.
Radio.co, oh my, you send them a problem at Sunday night, they won't thank me for saying this, but they will go out of their way to solve that there and then. They're a vibrant young team. They know radio, they know their stuff. And one of our first test transmission responses and feedback was the sound quality. And I'm not lying when I say to you, many said, how come the sound quality of your stream is better than BBC local stations? These guys are fantastic. They get it. They know what we're about. There are other suppliers that we engage that just not really that bothered. And, well, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So right off the bat, you're sounding like the big boys. You're better quality than the big boys. And you've got a really reliable, full of feature streaming company to back you up.
What makes the difference between a successful radio station and a failed project? Well, after working with tens of thousands of broadcasters over the past 15 years and helping lots of people start their own radio stations, I see the same mistakes being made time and time again. So what I've done is I've put together a guide called the 5-Step Radio Startup Checklist, which really covers everything from concepting your radio station to marketing it. And this guide, I believe, will make the difference between you having a successful venture with longevity and creating something that doesn't quite hit the mark. Go and grab your copy now for free at jamesm.com/radio. Just enter your name and your email address and I'll send it over to you straight away. You're going to find it really useful. There's tons of information there which will help you with concepting and launching your brand and bringing it to market.